There's a number a lot of people carry around in their head for years, a number they've been adding to, protecting, worrying about. And at some point, they look at it and think, okay, that's enough. I can stop. For a lot of Americans, that number is somewhere around $460,000. And if you're 63 and you've got that saved up, and you're thinking about filing for Social Security and finally walking away from work, I understand why it feels like permission. You've been doing this for 40 years. Your body knows it. Your patience has limits. And $406K is genuinely more than most Americans retire with. The average is closer to $288,000. So you're not behind. You're ahead. But here's what I want to talk about today, because this is the part that doesn't get said clearly enough. Being ahead of average doesn't always mean being okay. And retiring at 63 with $460 K and early Social Security isn't a safe exit. It's a high-stakes bet, a bet that nothing goes wrong in the first few years, a bet that your health holds, a bet that the market cooperates, a bet that $460K is actually enough to cover what the next 25 years are going to cost. Some people win that bet, but a lot of people don't see the terms clearly before they take it. So let's actually look at it, not to scare anyone, not to lecture, just to see it clearly, because you deserve that before you make a decision this permanent. Let's start with the number itself. $460,000 feels substantial, and it is. But let's talk about what it actually produces in retirement. There's a guideline called the 4% rule. It's been around for decades. The basic idea is that if you withdraw 4% of your portfolio each year and your money is invested in a balanced mix of stocks and bonds, there's a reasonable chance it lasts 30 years. That's the theory. 4% of $460,000 is $18,400 a year, about $1,533 a month. Now add Social Security. If you claim at 63, the average monthly benefit comes out to roughly $1,431. That's about $17,100 a year. Put those two together, your portfolio withdrawal plus your early Social Security, and you're looking at roughly $35,500 a year. Maybe a little more depending on your specific benefit. But in that neighborhood, here's the problem. The average American in their 60s spends around $60,000 a year. And that's not a lavish life. That's a mortgage or rent, utilities, groceries, a car, insurance, prescriptions, maybe a modest vacation. That's just living, which means if you retire at 63 with $460 K and early Social Security, and you're spending what most people in your situation spend, you're looking at a gap of roughly $25,000 a year that has to come from somewhere. And to cover that gap, you'd need to pull 5 or 6% out of your portfolio annually. Not 4, 5 or 6. That matters more than it sounds, because at that withdrawal rate, depending on market conditions, your portfolio starts running real depletion risk before you turn 85. And if you live into your late 80s or 90s, which more and more people do, you could find yourself in your final years with very little left. So the first thing to understand is that the comfortable version of this retirement, the one where you're not cutting things every year, not stressed every month, requires more income than $460 K at 63, can reliably provide. That's not a judgment. That's just the ledger. Now let's talk about Social Security, because this decision is where things get permanent in a way that's hard to fully appreciate until it's done. When you claim Social Security before your full retirement age, your benefit gets reduced, not temporarily, permanently. If you claim at 63, you receive 75% of what you would have gotten at full retirement age. That's a 25% reduction. For every month, you get a check. For the rest of your life, you're getting 75 cents on the dollar compared to what you would have received if you'd waited. And full retirement age for anyone born in 1960 or later is 67. So if you're 63 and you're thinking about filing, You're 4 years early. Here's what that actually means in dollars. If your full retirement age benefit would have been $2,000 a month, claiming at 63 gets you for $500. That's $500 less every single month. Over 20 years of retirement, that difference compounds into something significant, not just in total dollars, but in your monthly breathing room. But there's something else about this that people don't talk about enough. Your cost of living adjustments, your COBRA increases each year, are calculated as a percentage of your benefit. So if your benefit is lower because you claimed early, your annual increases are smaller too. When inflation runs hot, like it has in recent years, a smaller base means the gap between what things cost and what your check covers just keeps widening quietly year after year. I know why people claim early. I really do. The job is hard. The body's tired. Sometimes the workplace changes around you and you don't recognize it anymore. Sometimes there's a health scare and it makes everything feel urgent. These are real reasons. But the Social Security office doesn't know any of that. The reduction is the same regardless of why you filed. And the math is worth sitting with. Delaying to 67 would mean 33% more per month than claiming at 63. Waiting until 70 means 44% more than claiming at 62. For a married couple, that higher benefit also becomes the survivor benefit, meaning if one spouse dies, the other continues receiving the larger check. Claiming early doesn't just affect you, it affects the person you might leave behind. Now, I want to spend some time on something that gets almost no attention in these conversations, and it might be the most immediately dangerous part of retiring at 63. Medicare doesn't start until you're 65. You're 63. That's a 2-year gap, and that gap has a cost that can move your portfolio faster than almost anything else in early retirement. When you leave your employer, you have the option to continue your health coverage through COBRA. It covers you, but you're paying the full premium, what you paid before, plus what your employer was covering. For a single person, that runs somewhere between $1,800 and $30,300 a month, depending on your plan and where you live. Here's the catch. COBRA only lasts 18 months, so you use COBRA for a year and a half. Then what? You've still got 6 more months until Medicare kicks in. At that point, you're looking at ACA marketplace coverage, which can be subsidized. But whether you qualify for the subsidies depends on your modified adjusted gross income. And if you're drawing from a traditional IRA or 401k while also collecting Social Security, that income might push you out of the subsidy range entirely. Let's put some numbers on this. If you spend 18 months on COBRA at $2,500 a month, that's $45,000 just for health insurance, before you've seen a single doctor, filled a single prescription, or had a single unexpected diagnosis. That's $45,000 out of $460,000, nearly 10% of your entire retirement savings in the first year and a half, just to stay covered. And if something happens medically during those 2 years, a heart issue, a fall, a surgery, the out-of-pocket costs on top of that premium can be severe. A healthy couple retiring at 63 will need somewhere around $689,000 in lifetime healthcare costs by the time they're done. A single woman retiring at 63 and living to 90 is looking at over $560,000. These aren't scare numbers. These are what the data shows. And healthcare inflation runs around 5.8% a year, while your Social Security COBRA is 2.8%. That gap between what healthcare costs and what your income grows gets wider every year. The 2 years before Medicare aren't just inconvenient. They're one of the most financially dangerous stretches in an early retirement. And most people don't see it coming because they're so focused on the number in the account, they forget to look at what happens between 63 and 65. There's another risk that deserves serious attention, and it's one that doesn't get explained in plain language nearly enough. It's called sequence of returns risk, and it's the reason two people can retire with the exact same amount of money and have completely different outcomes, not because of anything they did differently, but because of when they happened to retire. Here's the basic reality. When you're withdrawing money from your portfolio in retirement, the order that returns happen matters enormously. If the market drops sharply in your first few years, while you're pulling money out to live on, you're selling shares at depressed prices. And those shares can't recover for you because they're gone. You've already spent them. If the market drops 20% in year one of your retirement, your $460,000 becomes $368,000, and you're still pulling out living expenses on top of that loss. The portfolio now has less capital working to recover, and MIT research found that about 77% of your long-term retirement outcome is determined by what happened in the first 10 years. Not your lifetime average returns, but those early years specifically. You can have a perfectly designed retirement plan that works on paper and watch it unravel because you happen to retire in 2008 or 2022. Not because you did anything wrong, just because of timing. And at $460,000, there's not much cushion. A significant early loss isn't something you can work back from if you're withdrawing every month to pay your bills. This isn't about predicting the market. Nobody can do that. It's about understanding that the first 5 years of retirement carry a disproportionate amount of risk, and that entering them with a lean portfolio and no income backup is genuinely precarious. I want to step back from the numbers for a minute, because there's a layer to this that doesn't fit on a spreadsheet, and I think it's the part that actually matters most to the people watching this. Retiring at 63 isn't just a financial decision, it's an identity decision. For most of the people thinking seriously about this, work has been the structure of their adult life, not just the income, the schedule, the sense of purpose, the reason to get up, the people to talk to. Even if you're exhausted by it, it's filled a role that doesn't just disappear the day you stop. And when the money is tight in retirement, when you're watching the account balance month after month, making small cuts, feeling the anxiety of no paycheck coming in, that financial stress lands differently than it did during your working years, because you don't have the mechanism to fix it anymore. You can't just work harder or pick up overtime. You're dependent on a portfolio to behave and a benefit that's locked in at whatever you filed it for. There's a survey from NIFA that found 46% of retirees say their biggest regret is not saving enough or not starting earlier, and 54% of women say they retired earlier than they wanted to, often because something forced them out, a health issue, a layoff, a workplace that made staying too difficult. These aren't people who made careless decisions. These are people who did the best they could and found the reality of retirement harder than the idea of it, harder financially, but also harder in ways that are about meaning, about routine, about who you are when the title and the schedule are gone. I think about the people who say they wished they'd retired sooner, and there are plenty of them, but there's a version of "I retired at 63 and I'm glad I did" that requires a very specific set of circumstances to be true. Decent health, either low spending or some part-time income, a plan for the days, not just the money, and ideally, healthcare covered through a spouse or a pension. Without those things, or at least most of them, early retirement at this level doesn't tend to look the way people imagine it. So what can actually be done? Because the goal here isn't to just lay out problems. It's to be honest about what the options are. There are really 4 levers. None of them feel easy, but they're real and they work. The first is delaying Social Security even a few years. Every year you wait past 63 increases your monthly benefit meaningfully. Getting to 67, your full retirement age, means 33% more per month for the rest of your life than you'd get at 63. That's not a small difference over a 20-year retirement. The second is working part-time for 2 or 3 more years, even in a reduced capacity. Not because you love it, but because those years of additional income allow your portfolio to keep growing instead of shrinking, reduce the number of years you need the money to last, and potentially bridge you to Medicare eligibility. Even $20,000 or $25,000 a year in part-time work changes the math significantly. The third is honest spending reduction, not dramatic sacrifice, but a clear-eyed look at what you actually need versus what you assumed you'd spend. Some people get to 63 and find their expenses naturally dropped. The kids are grown, the mortgage is smaller, the commute is gone. If your real spending is closer to $45,000 than $60,000, the picture improves. The fourth is strategic withdrawal ordering. This one's more technical, but worth mentioning. If you have both Roth accounts and traditional accounts, the order in which you draw from them affects your taxable income, which affects your ACA subsidy eligibility and your Medicare premium calculations down the road. Getting this right, especially in the first 2 years before Medicare, can save thousands. These aren't magic solutions, they're trade-offs, but they're real ones. And the people who retire at 63 with $460 K and end up okay, genuinely okay, not just surviving, are usually people who used at least 1 or 2 of these levers deliberately. The difference between the retirement that works and the one that slowly doesn't isn't usually the big decisions. It's the ones made in the 18 months before you file. The quiet planning that most people either rush through or skip entirely because they're ready to be done. Whether someone has healthcare lined up before Medicare, whether they've actually modeled out what 5 years of withdrawals looks like if the market has a rough stretch, whether they've been honest with themselves about what they spend, not what they think they spend, but what the bank statements actually show. The people who land well at 63 with $460K aren't luckier. They've usually just thought further ahead, not because they're more financially sophisticated, but because they gave themselves permission to look at the hard stuff before the decision was final. Here's where I want to land. $460,000 at 63 with early Social Security is not impossible. I want to be clear about that. There are people making it work. There are people who've done this and found their footing. But it's fragile in ways that aren't obvious from the outside. The healthcare gap before Medicare is real. The permanent Social Security reduction is real. The sequence of returns risk in the first 5 years is real. And the combination of all three, happening at once, in the early years of retirement when you have the least ability to recover, is what tends to turn a difficult situation into a permanent one. If you're 63 and you have $460K and you're wondering whether it's enough, the honest answer is, it depends. It depends on your health, your spending, your spouse's situation, whether you have any income flexibility, and yes, whether the market cooperates in the early years. But here's what I know for certain. The people who regret their retirement decisions most, and that 46% figure isn't abstract. Those are real people. They almost never say they wish they'd retired earlier. They say they wish they'd known more, planned better, waited just a little longer when a little longer still would have mattered. This isn't about working until you drop. It's not about chasing some perfect number that keeps moving. It's about understanding what you're actually walking into, clearly, specifically, with both eyes open, before the decision is permanent. Because unlike a lot of choices in life, the ones you make at 63 about Social Security and retirement have a very long tail. They follow you, and the gap between doing this right and doing it too soon, without enough cushion, is the difference between a retirement that feels like freedom and one that feels like a slow financial pressure you can never quite escape. You've worked too long and too hard for the second version. So if this raised questions you hadn't thought about yet, that's worth something. Take those questions seriously. Talk to someone who can actually look at your specific numbers, not a general rule. Your numbers, your situation. Drop a comment below if something here hit home for you. What's the part of retirement planning you feel least prepared for? What's the question nobody's been honest enough to answer? We read everything, and if you're already on the other side of this decision, already retired, tell us what you know now that you didn't then. That conversation matters more than any spreadsheet.